More than 2,500 years ago, a young Hebrew named Daniel, exiled in Babylon, received visions so impressive and precise that they managed to predict the rise and fall of empires even before they existed. These prophecies map the course of world history with an accuracy that defies natural explanations, predicting with exactitude events such as the Persian conquest, Greek domination under Alexander the Great, and the rise of the Roman Empire. However, amid these detailed revelations, there are three final prophecies that remain incomplete, three cataclysmic events that could be about to unfold in our own generation. What would happen if we discovered that we are living in the last days of history as we know it, without even realizing it? What if today's headlines were just the first signs of a cosmic drama that was predicted millennia ago and is now reaching its climax? At the heart of Daniel's prophecies, there exists a temporal code so precise that, when deciphered, reveals a divine timeline spanning millennia. Known as the prophecy of 70 weeks, this extraordinary revelation was delivered to Daniel by the angel Gabriel, not as a vague enigma, but as a meticulous timeline that would map the crucial moments of human history. Imagine being in possession of a document that predicts with exactitude world events centuries before they happen. How would this change your perspective on the apparent chaos we witness daily? The prophecy begins in Daniel chapter 9 verses 24 to 27, when Gabriel announces, 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon your holy city. These are not literal weeks of 7 days, but rather weeks of years, each week representing 7 years. Thus, 70 prophetic weeks equal 490 years. This period was divided into three distinct segments. The first 7 weeks, 49 years, destined for the reconstruction of Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile, followed by 62 weeks, 434 years, that would lead to the arrival of the Messiah, and a final week, 7 years, that would culminate in the establishment of the eternal kingdom. The most impressive aspect of this prophecy is its mathematical precision. The starting point was the decree of the Persian king Artaxerxes in 457 before Christ, authorizing the reconstruction of Jerusalem. Counting 483 years, 69 prophetic weeks, from this date, we arrive exactly at the year 27 after Christ, the precise moment when Jesus began his public ministry. How could Daniel, writing 5 centuries earlier, predict with such accuracy not only the emergence of the Messiah, but the exact year of his ministry? Is it coincidence or evidence of a divine intelligence operating through these ancient words? After the crucifixion of Jesus, something extraordinary happened in the prophetic clock. It stopped. The prophecy clearly indicated that the Messiah would be cut off after week 69, but before week 70. This mysterious interval, a divine hiatus that has already lasted approximately 2,000 years, is what we know as the Church Age. During this period, God's plan for Israel seems suspended, while his focus turned to the formation of a people that transcends nationalities and geographical boundaries. But what many do not realize is that this prophetic clock is about to resume its counting. Daniel's final week, those last 7 years, is waiting to begin. And when it does, it will unleash the most tumultuous period of human history, known as the Great Tribulation. Have you ever wondered why so many people instinctively feel we are living at a decisive moment in history? Is it merely collective anxiety or a premonition based on spiritual realities that are about to manifest? What makes this last week so significant is the event that initiates it, a covenant or peace treaty involving Israel and many nations. Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 states that he, the Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. This seemingly promising agreement will mark the beginning of the end. Consider how today Israel is at the center of global geopolitical tensions, with countless attempts at peace agreements in the Middle East. Isn't this political configuration exactly the scenario necessary for the fulfillment of this millennial prophecy? The most disturbing aspect of the prophecy of 70 weeks is what happens in the middle of this last week. After 3.5 years of apparent peace, the world leader who mediated the agreement will show his true face. Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 continues, "In the middle of the week he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate." This event, known as the Abomination of Desolation, will occur when the Antichrist breaks his treaty with Israel, profanes a rebuilt temple, and declares himself God, demanding worldwide worship. Jesus himself referred to this prophecy of Daniel when speaking about the signs of the end times. In Matthew chapter 24 verses 15 to 21, he warned, "When you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by the prophet Daniel, Then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. These words lead us to an inescapable conclusion. The prophecy of 70 weeks is not just a historical account, but a prophetic warning about future events of unprecedented magnitude. The precision with which the first 69 weeks were fulfilled offers us a disturbing guarantee that week 70 will also be fulfilled, exactly as predicted. And if the signs of the times are reliable indicators, this last week may be closer than we imagine. I ponder to myself, what would it be like to live in a world where prophecies from 2,500 years ago begin to materialize before our eyes? If we have already witnessed the fulfillment of the first 69 weeks, shouldn't we pay special attention to the signs pointing to the beginning of the 70th? The events that Daniel saw millennia ago were not merely distant possibilities or spiritual allegories. They were precise harbingers of future realities. The divine clock of 70 weeks continues ticking, inexorable in its progression toward the conclusion of God's plan for the ages. And while we await the beginning of that last and terrible week, one question remains. Will we be prepared for what comes next, or will we be like those in the days of Noah, who continued their normal lives until the moment when the waters of judgment began to rise? On a night of unrest, Daniel was plagued by a vision so disturbing that it left him deeply distressed. From the tempestuous sea of humanity, symbol of agitated nations, emerged four monstrous beasts, each representing a world empire. But it was the fourth beast that terrified him most, indescribable, with iron teeth and 10 horns. Among these arose a little horn, with human eyes and a mouth speaking arrogant words. What makes this vision so extraordinary is not only its historical precision, already proven by the rise and fall of the Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Greek, and Roman empires, but the psychological portrait it paints of the final ruler. Daniel doesn't merely describe his political power, but his personality. Cunning, perceptive, the human eyes, and eloquent, the mouth that speaks arrogant words. Isn't this the exact profile of the leader our polarized and chaotic world yearns for? Someone intellectually brilliant and communicatively persuasive? Throughout history, various figures prefigured the final Antichrist, functioning as types or rehearsals of the one to come. Antiochus Epiphanes IV, the Seleucid ruler who defiled the Jewish temple in 167 before Christ, placing an altar to Zeus in the most holy place and sacrificing pigs, an act so horrific that Daniel called it an abomination of desolation. Or Nero, the Roman emperor whose name in Hebrew gematria equals 666, who blamed Christians for the fire of Rome and turned them into human torches. Each of these men manifested aspects of the Antichrist's personality and behavior: megalomania, self-deification, religious persecution, and an insatiable thirst for power. But none of them possessed the lethal combination of all characteristics nor the technological means to implement a truly global dominion. Have you reflected on how these historical rehearsals serve as warnings, allowing us to recognize the patterns when the true Antichrist emerges? The most underestimated aspect of the Antichrist's reign may be its economic dimension. In Revelation chapter 13, John expands Daniel's vision, revealing that no one will be able to buy or sell without the mark of the beast. For the first time in history, the technological infrastructure for such a system exists. Central bank digital currencies are in advanced development, gradually eliminating physical money. Digital identity technologies are being implemented globally. Facial recognition algorithms and biometrics have made universal tracking a technical reality. What many see as mere digital conveniences are, in fact, modular components of a system that, in the wrong hands, could implement absolute social control. Consider how, during the pandemic, entire societies accepted unprecedented restrictions on mobility, contact tracing, and digital certificates to access basic services. Wasn't this a disturbing rehearsal of the socio-economic control that Daniel predicted? Daniel chapter 8 verse 24 reveals something even more disturbing about the Antichrist. His power will be great, but not by his own power. This enigmatic statement suggests that the Antichrist will not be merely a talented human, but a vessel for supernatural forces. Revelation complements this vision, describing how the dragon, Satan, will give his power, throne, and great authority to the beast. We are talking about someone who will transcend normal human limitations, manifesting abilities that will seem miraculous. In an increasingly secular world, where science has become the new religion, How devastatingly effective would someone be who could perform seemingly supernatural feats that defy conventional scientific explanations? In a context where many have lost faith in traditional institutions, governments, organized religions, academia, wouldn't a leader who seemed to transcend these flawed structures be irresistible, offering an apparently verifiable spirituality through tangible demonstrations of power? What few analyze is the psychological sophistication with which the Antichrist will conquer minds and hearts. Daniel chapter 11 verse 21 describes him as someone who will seize the kingdom through intrigue. The Hebrew term for intrigue, kalaklakit, implies seductive smoothness, flattery, and subtle deception. He will not appear as an obvious monster, but as a compassionate savior. He will not impose his dominion abruptly, but gradually, normalizing each new intrusion on human freedom. Like the metaphor of the frog in slowly heating water, populations will be conditioned to accept ever greater restrictions in exchange for promises of security, stability, and well-being. In an era of existential threats, climate change, pandemics, terrorism, nuclear conflicts, how easily would millions surrender fundamental freedoms in exchange for the promise of protection against these threats? An often neglected aspect of Daniel's prophecy is how the Antichrist will change the times and the laws. Daniel chapter 7 verse 25. This is not merely a reference to the manipulation of calendars or legislations, but to the fundamental re-engineering of social institutions and human moral consciousness itself. He will implement a complete revision of values, rewriting what is considered virtue and vice, merit and transgression. Are we witnessing the preliminary stages of this process? Consider how fundamental concepts about gender, family, freedom of expression, and objective truth are being radically redefined in our generation. Paradigms that remained stable for millennia are being deconstructed in decades. Wouldn't this be exactly the fertile ground necessary for someone who intends to completely reshape the moral order? The most innovative aspect of the Antichrist's regime will be its religious system. Daniel chapter 11 verse 38 states that he will honor the God of fortresses, a deity not recognized by his ancestors. Many scholars interpret this as a form of technological self-deification, the veneration of human power amplified through technology. We live in an era where transhumanists speak openly about transcending biological limitations, where artificial intelligence promises divine capabilities, and where billionaires invest in longevity technologies to defeat death. The cult that the Antichrist will establish will not be a return to ancient pagan deities, but a futuristic religion that promises transcendence through technology, the deification of humanity by its own means. Aren't we already seeing the contours of this technological faith emerging in our culture? What makes the Antichrist especially dangerous is his multicultural adaptability. Daniel chapter 11 verse 37 states that he will show no regard for the gods of his ancestors or for the one desired by women, nor will he regard any god, but will exalt himself above them all. This is a figure who will transcend traditional religious divisions, offering a universalist spirituality that incorporates elements from all traditions while subverting their essences. In our globalized world, where religious syncretism and personal, a la carte spirituality already largely replace traditional doctrinal adherences, wouldn't a leader who presented an apparently inclusive spiritual synthesis be perfectly plausible? Someone who would use Christian terminology for Christians, Islamic concepts for Muslims, Vedic principles for Hindus, all reinterpreted to converge in his own person as the final manifestation of divine consciousness. The way the Antichrist will subjugate nations will reveal a masterful geopolitical game. Daniel chapter 11 verse 39 describes, "He will attack the mightiest fortresses with the help of a foreign god and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him." This suggests a strategy of co-optation and subversion, not conquering nations by brute force, but infiltrating them through strategic alliances. Those who align with him will receive extraordinary rewards, while resistors will face devastating isolation. In a world where global economic interdependence has made national self-sufficiency almost impossible, where critical supply chains cross multiple borders, and where the financial system is integrally connected, how effective would this strategy be? Could a nation resist when its energy, food, medicines, and market access depend on its compliance with the global system? What makes Daniel's prophecy truly extraordinary is how it anticipates the fundamental tension of our era, the struggle between individual sovereignty and centralized control. The Antichrist system will represent the culmination of totalitarian tendencies we already observe: omnipresent surveillance, algorithmic censorship, direct monetary control, and massive psychological conditioning. However, Daniel also envisions resistance. The people who know their God will firmly resist, Daniel chapter 11 verse 32. This resistance will not be primarily military or political, but spiritual and intellectual. The refusal to submit individual conscience to collectivist tyranny, regardless of the cost. Are we observing the initial stages of this decisive battle? On one side, increasingly sophisticated systems of control. On the other, a growing awakening to the value of human freedom and individual sovereignty. This conflict of visions is not merely political. It is the definitive battle for humanity's soul that Daniel predicted more than 2 millennia ago. While Daniel's visions about the Antichrist are disturbing, his prophetic manuscript does not end in darkness. As a counterpoint to the horror of corrupt human empires, Daniel received a transcendent vision, the revelation of a kingdom that will never be destroyed. In the second chapter of his book, he interprets King Nebuchadnezzar's troubling dream, a colossal statue with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Each material represented a world empire, from Babylon to Rome and its modern extensions. But the climax of the vision is not in the statue, but in what destroys it. A stone was cut out, not by human hands, and it struck the statue on its feet and smashed them, Daniel chapter 2 verse 34. This supernatural stone not only demolished all human empires, but became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. What profound irony! Humanity, in its arrogance, builds increasingly impressive empires, only to see them reduced to dust by a force that did not come from human hands. The most revolutionary aspect of this kingdom is not its overwhelming power, but its fundamentally different nature. Daniel chapter 2 verse 44 proclaims, "The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever." Consider for a moment the historical anomaly of this prophecy. All ancient civilizations believed in perpetual cycles. Empires rise and fall in endless succession. No Babylonian, Egyptian, or Greek scholar conceived of an end of history, only its infinite repetition. Yet Daniel dared to proclaim that the wheel of history would be broken, that a kingdom would come that would not merely succeed the previous ones but permanently replace them. This is a linear vision of history with a defined destiny, a revolutionary concept in its time and still profoundly counterintuitive to many contemporary philosophies that return to the cyclical perspective. Isn't it fascinating how this small prophetic light has persisted for millennia, even when larger philosophical systems tried to extinguish it? The nature of this kingdom defies our conventional political categories. It is not just an incremental improvement over previous systems. It is not perfected capitalism or idealized socialism. Daniel chapter 7 verse 14 describes it thus, "He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." This description reveals an extraordinary paradox, a kingdom simultaneously universal and particular, transcending ethnic and linguistic divisions while maintaining the specificity of each culture under a single sovereign. This is not the homogenizing globalism we see today, which dissolves distinct cultural identities into an amorphous mass, nor is it fragmenting nationalism that isolates peoples from each other. It is an unprecedented unity in diversity, something we have never managed to achieve in our fractured history. What would it be like to live in a society where universality and particularity are finally reconciled? In contrast to the brief reign of the Antichrist, the coming kingdom will have a characteristic that no human empire has ever possessed: eternity. Daniel chapter 7 verse 27 elaborates, "Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him." What does an eternal kingdom mean in practical terms? It is not merely longevity. It is immunity to the corrosive forces that inevitably destroy all human civilizations. Internal corruption, moral decay, environmental degradation, social stratification, bureaucratic sclerosis. Every empire in history, no matter how powerful, contained the seeds of its own destruction. Why would this kingdom be fundamentally different? The answer lies in its origin, not arising from below, from human ambitions, but coming from above, imposed by a sovereign will that transcends the limitations of corrupted human nature. The true revolution of this kingdom lies in who will govern it. Daniel chapter 7 verses 13 to 14 describes an astonishing vision. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. This enigmatic title, Son of Man, is precisely what Jesus adopted as his preferred self-designation in the Gospels. It is no coincidence that, when questioned by the high priest whether he was the Messiah, Jesus responded by quoting exactly this passage from Daniel. You will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Matthew chapter 26 verse 64. This declaration was considered so blasphemous that it guaranteed his death sentence. Why? Because everyone understood what Jesus was claiming, that he was the divine human ruler prophesied by Daniel, the one who would establish the eternal kingdom. Have you considered the historical significance of this? A Jewish carpenter, executed as a political criminal in an obscure corner of the Roman Empire, dared to identify himself as the future ruler of all nations. And 2 millennia later, billions still await his return to establish that kingdom. The nature of this kingdom is revealed in the radical changes it will introduce. Isaiah expanded Daniel's vision, describing a transformed world where the wolf will live with the lamb. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord. Isaiah chapter 11 verses 6 to 9. This is not just superficial political peace, but an ecological and moral transformation of creation itself. The reversal of the curse that has affected the planet since the human fall. While modern political systems debate environmental preservation versus economic development, the prophetic vision presents a perfect harmony between humanity and nature that transcends this false dilemma. Revelation chapter 21 verse 4 completes this picture. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Imagine a world without hospitals, without funerals, without trauma, where the dominant note is not survival, but flourishing. Can you visualize such a society? Or is our imagination so damaged by cynicism that we have lost the ability to conceive of a genuinely good reality? The most revolutionary aspect of this kingdom is how it transforms our understanding of power. In all human empires, represented by the predatory beasts in Daniel's visions, power flows from top to bottom through coercion, whether explicit or subtle. Fear of punishment or exclusion maintains social hierarchies. But the coming kingdom completely inverts this dynamic. Jesus, its future ruler, defined leadership as service. The greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. Luke chapter 22 verse 26. In the eternal kingdom, authority does not derive from the ability to inflict suffering, but from the ability to promote flourishing, not from imposing one's will on others, but from elevating others to their fullness. It is an ontological revolution of the very meaning of power, no longer as domination, but as empowerment. This conception is as far beyond our conventional political paradigms as quantum physics is beyond Newtonian mechanics. Can you imagine a society where authority and service are synonyms, not antonyms? An often neglected aspect of this kingdom is its judicial dimension. Daniel chapter 7 verses 9 to 10 describes a solemn scene. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. In contrast to human judicial systems, frequently manipulated by wealth or power, here we have perfect judgment, where every action and motivation are evaluated with absolute clarity. In an era of moral relativism, where the very notion of objective truth is contested, this vision of definitive reckoning sounds almost archaic. Yet, doesn't a longing for true justice persist in our hearts? When we witness atrocities that were never punished, corruption that was never exposed, lies that were never unmasked, don't we feel a deep desire for a final court where truth will prevail undeniably? Daniel glimpsed exactly this, a moment where every distortion will be corrected, every deception unmasked, every evil will face its just sentence. The transition to this kingdom will not be gradual or democratic. It will be cataclysmic and sovereign. Daniel chapter 2 verse 34 describes the stone cut, not by human hands, that pulverizes the statue of human kingdoms. This is not a reform from within the system, but an external intervention that completely reconfigures reality. As Jesus explained to Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world," John chapter 18 verse 36. It does not emerge organically from existing structures. It comes as divine intervention in history. This concept directly contradicts both the progressive vision of gradual social evolution and the conservative perspective of returning to past golden ages. The prophetic vision affirms something much more radical, that no human political configuration, past, present, or future, can produce the final kingdom. This will come as a gift, not as an achievement, as supernatural eruption, not as natural development. Of all Christianity's countercultural assertions, could this be the most subversive, that the utopia we unconsciously long for cannot be built by human hands, only received as a divine gift? Who will inhabit this kingdom? Daniel chapter 7 verse 27 states that the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms will be handed over to the holy people. But who are these holy people? The word does not designate super-religious individuals or ascetics, but simply those who recognize God's sovereignty and live aligned with His values. Ordinary people of all nationalities, social classes, and eras who have chosen loyalty to the coming kingdom over the kingdoms of this world. Jesus presented the central paradox of citizenship in this kingdom when He declared, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it." Matthew chapter 16 verse 25. Entry into this kingdom requires a paradoxical act of surrender, abdicating the throne of our own life and recognizing another sovereign. In a culture obsessed with self-expression and self-determination, this requirement sounds almost offensive. Yet, isn't it precisely our insistence on absolute autonomy that has produced so many of our contemporary pathologies? Is it possible that our true freedom lies not in radical self-determination, but in voluntary submission to a perfectly good king? While we await the full manifestation of this kingdom, Daniel offers us a transformative perspective on how to live in the present. In Daniel chapter 12 verse 3 he writes, "Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever." In a world defined by instability and ephemerality, where corporate empires and powerful nations can disappear in a generation, Daniel suggests an investment in eternal values. Those who commit themselves to truth and justice, not as abstractions, but as embodied practices, are aligned with the coming kingdom even while living in present kingdoms. This is not utopian escapism, but prophetic engagement, recognizing the limitations of current systems without debilitating cynicism, working for justice in the present without the illusion that we will create heaven on earth, living as ambassadors of that eternal kingdom amid the temporary structures of this world. Wouldn't this be the wisest possible navigation in times as turbulent as ours? In His parables and discourses about the end times, Jesus frequently resorted to a specific historical analogy that, at first glance, seems disconcerting. In Matthew chapter 24 verses 37 to 39, He declared, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." This comparison is extraordinarily revealing, not for what it mentions, but for what it seems to omit. Jesus does not cite the extreme violence or moral corruption of that time as main indicators, but completely ordinary activities: eating, drinking, marrying. What does this communicate to us? That the most disturbing sign is not the presence of obvious evil, but the persistent normality in the face of imminent catastrophe. It is this state of spiritual sleepwalking, this collective anesthesia in the face of transcendent realities, that characterizes both the days of Noah and our own times. When we examine Genesis's account of the pre-flood days, we discover a society marked by extreme contrasts. Genesis chapter 6 verse 5 states that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Simultaneously, Genesis chapter 4 verses 20 to 22 describes impressive advances in cattle breeding, music, and metallurgy. This juxtaposition is fascinating. Technological progress coexisting with moral degeneration. The antediluvian civilization was apparently experiencing cultural and technological flourishing while suffering internal ethical decay. Doesn't this dichotomy disturbingly mirror our own condition? We live in the most technologically advanced era in history, with capabilities that our ancestors would consider literally magical, while simultaneously experiencing social fragmentation, spiritual emptiness, and collapse of fundamental moral consensus. Is it possible that this specific combination, technological brilliance coupled with moral disorientation, is precisely the sign that Jesus wanted us to identify? A central characteristic of pre-flood society was the normalization of the extraordinary. Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 enigmatically mentions that there were giants on the earth in those days, and describes situations that violated fundamental boundaries between spiritual and physical realms. Yet, daily life continued, markets functioned, marriages were celebrated, buildings were constructed. The human capacity to normalize the abnormal is astonishing. As adaptable creatures, we quickly acclimate to conditions that a previous generation would have considered unbearable or unthinkable. Don't we witness this same phenomenon today? Realities that would have been unimaginable a few decades ago, ubiquitous surveillance, genetic manipulation, autonomous artificial intelligence, immersive virtual reality, extreme social polarization, were quickly integrated into our sense of normalcy. The profound question this comparison raises is, what transgressions of fundamental boundaries have we already normalized, which should actually function as spiritual alarms? Jesus expanded his analogy by also including the days of Lot. Luke chapter 17 verses 28 to 29. People were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But the day Lot left Sodom, fire and sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. Again, ordinary activities, not atrocities, are highlighted. What distinguished Sodom was not just its notorious immorality, but its arrogant self-sufficiency. Ezekiel chapter 16 verse 49 offers a surprising perspective. Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. The city combined material abundance with social and spiritual insensitivity, a combination that inevitably corrupts the moral fabric of any society. In our contemporary metropolises, don't we see this same paradox? Centers of extraordinary wealth and technological innovation that simultaneously witness increasing levels of social isolation, mental illness, chemical dependency, and economic inequality. Sodom's lesson is not simply a denunciation of specific immorality, but a warning against the narcotization of moral consciousness that purposeless abundance often produces. A consistent pattern in Jesus' analogies is the division of society into two categories: the unaware majority and the vigilant minority. In both stories, only a small group, Noah's family, Lot's family, perceived the signs and responded appropriately. This division did not follow conventional lines of social status, wealth, or even external religiosity. In Luke chapter 17 verses 34 to 36, Jesus develops this theme. I tell you, on that night 2 people will be in one bed. One will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding grain together. One will be taken and the other left. The final separation does not occur between nations, social classes, or formal religious affiliations, but cuts through them, dividing the spiritually conscious from the spiritually asleep, even within the same social and family structures. This uncomfortable truth challenges all our conventional sociological categories. What really distinguishes these 2 categories of people? Is it simply a matter of perception? The ability to discern transcendent realities operating beneath the surface of everyday life? The persistence of normality before judgment reveals a profound truth about human psychology, our extraordinary capacity for self-deception. Noah preached for decades while building the ark, 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 5, offering ample opportunities for repentance. In Sodom, Lot tried to warn his future sons-in-law, but he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. Genesis chapter 19 verse 14. One of the most consistent patterns of human experience is our capacity to ignore inconvenient truths, especially those that would require radical changes in our way of life. When Jesus declares that people knew nothing until the flood came and took them all away, he is not describing factual ignorance, but willful blindness. The signs were present, the warnings were given, the ark was being built in plain sight, but they chose not to see, not to hear, not to respond. Doesn't this collective refusal to recognize uncomfortable realities also characterize our era of climate denial, informational isolation, and ideological polarization? How much of our not knowing is really choosing not to know? Jesus indicates that the days of Noah will be characterized not just by dramatic wickedness, but by a particular form of wickedness, one that erodes fundamental boundaries established by the Creator. Genesis chapter 6 verses 1 to 4 describes transgressions that confused basic categories of the created order. Similarly, Jude chapter 1 verse 7 states that Sodom and Gomorrah practiced sexual immorality and perversion, literally going after strange/different flesh, indicating desires that transgressed natural boundaries. In both cases, we see societies that not only violated specific moral norms, but systematically eroded fundamental boundaries of the created order. Don't we witness analogous phenomena today? Technologies that dilute boundaries between human and machine, genetic manipulation that questions the definition of species, virtual realities that obscure the line between the actual and the simulated, ideologies that challenge fundamental biological distinctions. The question is not whether such developments are individually problematic, but whether they collectively represent an ethos of boundary transgression that echoes the patterns Jesus identified as precursory signs. A frequently neglected detail in the days of Noah analogy is the existence of two contrasting groups in that society. Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 mentions both the giants, Nephilim, and the men of renown. The latter were cultural celebrities, leaders, influencers, those whose names were known and admired. In contrast, Noah is described simply as righteous and blameless, qualities that rarely guarantee cultural fame. This juxtaposition is revealing. In pre-judgment societies, there typically exists a misalignment between perceived value and real value, between those who are celebrated and those who truly discern the times. Jesus elaborates on this theme in Luke chapter 6 verse 26. Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you, for that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets. Cultural popularity often signals conformity to prevailing values, not prophetic discernment. In our era of instant celebrities and digital influencers, how much of our attention economy is dedicated to contemporary men of renown, and how little to modern Noahs, who might be building metaphorical arks while being ridiculed by the dominant culture? Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Jesus' analogy is the apparent unpredictability of the final judgment. For those without spiritual discernment, the flood came suddenly, as did the fire upon Sodom. However, for Noah and Lot, these events were not surprises. They were the climax of a long period of warnings, preparation, and expectation. Jesus applies this same duality of perception to the final events. For the world, his coming will be like a thief in the night, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 2, but for the watchful, events will follow recognizable signs. The parable of the fig tree, Matthew chapter 24 verses 32 to 33, emphasizes this responsibility of discernment. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. The difference is not in external events, but an internal ability to interpret them correctly, a capacity that Jesus directly links to spiritual health. How do we develop this type of discernment in an age saturated with disinformation, narrative manipulation, and apocalyptic sensationalism? The countercultural aspect of the days of Noah analogy is its rejection of linear progress as the definitive narrative of human history. Antediluvian society was not evolving toward a better future, but heading toward an unrecognized catastrophe. This perspective directly challenges both secular technological optimism, which sees scientific advancement as salvation, and utopian social progressivism, which sees moral evolution as inevitable. Equally challenging, it contradicts simplistic declinist narratives that see only continuous deterioration. The biblical pattern is more complex. Periods of apparent progress and stability often masking internal moral degradation that eventually leads to catastrophic tipping points. This is not pessimistic determinism, but spiritual realism. As Jesus warned in Luke chapter 12 verses 54 to 56, when you see a cloud rising in the west, immediately you say, "It's going to rain," and it does. And when the south wind blows, you say, "It's going to be hot," and it is. Hypocrites! You know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky. How is it that you don't know how to interpret this present time? The inability to discern spiritual signs is not an intellectual deficiency, but a moral one, a form of hypocrisy that applies judicious discernment to material matters while remaining deliberately obtuse in spiritual matters. The final and deepest lesson of the days of Noah is not fatalism, but preparation. Noah not only recognized the signs, he responded constructively to them. For decades, while society continued its routine of eating and drinking, he methodically built the ark, a concrete project of preparation for the future that God had revealed. Jesus concludes several of his parables about the last days with the same exhortation. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. Matthew chapter 24 verse 42. This watchfulness is not passive waiting, but active preparation, character development, spiritual practices, resilient community, faithful witness. As Peter emphasizes, awareness of coming judgment should not produce paralysis, but transformation. Since everything will be destroyed in this way, what kind of people ought you to be? You ought to live holy and godly lives. 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 11. Prophetic knowledge was not given to satisfy eschatological curiosity, but to inspire spiritual reform. The real question is not whether we can predict the exact date of final events, but whether we are living in such a way that we will be ready when they occur, building arcs of faithfulness in a world that continues eating and drinking, unaware of the approaching flood. Human history is moving toward a singular event that will divide time into before and after with unprecedented clarity: the return of Jesus Christ. Unlike his first coming, as a vulnerable baby in an obscure manger, his second coming will be unmistakable and universally visible. In his own words, "For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man." Matthew chapter 24 verse 27. This will not be a local or ambiguous event, but a cosmic occurrence witnessed simultaneously across the entire planet. The promises of this return are not peripheral to the biblical narrative. They are its backbone. Jesus dedicated entire chapters to describing this event, Matthew chapters 24 to 25, Luke chapter 21, and much of the New Testament was written under the imminent expectation of his return. His promise to return was so central to his message that, if he did not return, the entire edifice of the Christian faith would collapse. "If I go and prepare a place for you," he declared, "I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am." John chapter 14 verse 3. Have you ever stopped to consider what it means to live in a universe where the very architect of history has promised to return to complete what he began? The most surprising aspect of this return will be its context of apparent normality. Jesus compared this moment to the days of Noah, a period where life proceeded with ordinary routines when, suddenly, judgment arrived. People were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. Then the flood came and destroyed them all. Luke chapter 17 verse 27. This description does not suggest a world in obvious collapse, but a world engaged in everyday activities: commerce, entertainment, relationships, a world functioning with superficial normalcy while ignoring the signs of imminent divine intervention. Today we live exactly like this, bombarded by climate alerts, pandemics, geopolitical conflicts, and moral collapses, yet we continue with our lives as if everything will continue indefinitely. Entertainment, consumption, and immediate gratification dominate our priorities, while existential questions are relegated to the margins of collective consciousness. Isn't this illusory normality precisely the scenario that Jesus predicted for the days preceding his return? Christ's return will trigger an event known as the rapture, perhaps the most misunderstood and frequently ridiculed concept of biblical prophecies. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verses 16 to 17, Paul describes, "For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air." The word "caught up" translates the Greek term harpagesometha, indicating being seized or taken away with sudden force. This is not an ethereal or spiritual event, but physical and tangible. The instantaneous transformation of mortal bodies into immortal ones and the gathering of living and resurrected believers with Christ. Popular culture has reduced this event to a cliché: abandoned cars and empty clothes, obscuring its profound theological significance. The moment when the barrier between the natural and supernatural completely dissolves, and the redemption not just of souls, but of human bodies themselves, is realized. The defining characteristic of this event will be its unpredictable and instantaneous nature. Jesus declared that he would come like a thief in the night, Revelation chapter 16 verse 15, not because he is furtive or dishonest, but because his coming will be unexpected and without prior warning. Paul used the metaphor of a woman in labor. While people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly, as labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 3. Note the irony of this description. Precisely when the world celebrates peace and safety, perhaps after some global agreement, judgment arrives. In one moment, life will proceed normally. In the next moment, everything will be irrevocably transformed. Two women will be grinding grain together. One will be taken and the other left. Luke chapter 17 verse 35. This sudden separation of humanity reveals an uncomfortable truth. External appearances do not determine eternal destinies. Relationships, geographic proximity, or social associations will not guarantee salvation when the moment of the great division arrives. The visibility of Christ's return is repeatedly emphasized in Scripture, contradicting notions of a secret rapture. When Jesus ascended to heaven, angels declared to the disciples, "This same Jesus, who has been taken from you into heaven, will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." Acts chapter 1 verse 11. He ascended physically, visibly, and so he will return. Revelation chapter 1 verse 7 is even more explicit. "Look, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him." This will be a global manifestation that will transcend time zones, language barriers, and cultural divisions, an event witnessed simultaneously by all humanity. In an era where shared global experiences have become common, think of the billions who simultaneously watch sporting events or historic moments. We can begin to conceive how such a global event would be possible. However, this will not be just another media event. It will be a cosmic revelation that removes all ambiguity about transcendent reality. A frequently neglected aspect of Christ's return is its judicial character. He does not return primarily as Savior, but as Judge. Moreover, the Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son. John chapter 5 verse 22. This aspect of Christ, as humanity's ultimate judge, is widely ignored in contemporary culture that prefers to emphasize exclusively his love and compassion. However, justice and mercy are not contradictory, but complementary. In a world marked by unresolved injustices, unpunished crimes, and innocent suffering, final judgment is not a gloomy threat, but a moral necessity. How could cosmic reconciliation exist without a final reckoning? How could there be true resolution without truth being unequivocally established? The parable of the sheep and the goats, Matthew chapter 25 verses 31 to 46, reveals that this judgment will not be based on abstract theological orthodoxy, but on how we treated the least of these, how our beliefs translated into practical compassion for those whom Jesus valued. To fully understand the significance of Christ's return, we must recognize its function as history's ultimate fulfillment. Western culture inherited from the Hebrews a linear view of history, with beginning, middle, and end, in contrast to cyclical perspectives prevalent in the ancient world. This historical teleology implies progress with purpose, not merely endless repetition. Christ's return represents the telos, the culminating point toward which the entire narrative has been directed from the beginning. For from him and through him and for him are all things. Romans chapter 11 verse 36. This perspective profoundly challenges our contemporary mindset that views history as an accidental series of events without intrinsic meaning or defined destiny. If the universe is indeed moving toward a moment of definitive revelation and judgment, then our lives are not existential exercises in self-invention, but moral journeys with eternal consequences. How would our approach to life change if we truly believed that history has a predetermined destination, and that destination is an encounter with its creator? Christ's return will fundamentally challenge our conceptions about reality and authority. In a world that has gradually marginalized the transcendent, reducing all reality to the material and empirical, the visible manifestation of the resurrected Christ will represent the complete implosion of philosophical materialism. When every knee will bow, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, Philippians chapter 2 verses 10 to 11, the artificially created consensus that excludes the supernatural will be instantly dissolved. This will be the moment of ultimate truth, not because opinions will be censored, but because reality will be undeniable. Consider for a moment, if you were genuinely convinced that at some future point, every human being will recognize Christ's authority, willingly or not, how would that transform your priorities today? If we knew with certainty that one day we will give account to him for every word and action, how would we reorganize our lives now? Christ's return will establish a final and irreversible distinction between two human groups, not based on nationality, social class, or even external religious affiliation, but on genuine relationship with him. Jesus described this moment in disturbingly personal terms. "Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" Matthew chapter 7 verses 22 to 23. Note the surprising criterion here: not impressive religious achievements, but intimate relational knowledge. This is possibly the most counterintuitive distinction imaginable in a world obsessed with external metrics of success. It suggests that humanity's true dividing line will not be between religious and secular, but between those who cultivated genuine spiritual authenticity and those who settled for empty religious performances. How would you fare if the final criterion was not perfect doctrine or impeccable morality, but relational authenticity with the divine? The proper preparation for this event is neither apocalyptic panic nor obsessive chronological speculation, but sustained spiritual vigilance. In the parables of the 10 virgins and the talents, Matthew chapter 25, Jesus emphasized the importance of constant preparation and faithful investment of the resources entrusted to us. The question is not so much when he will return, but whether we will be ready when he does return. Paul described the prepared as children of light, who, unlike those in darkness, will not be surprised. "But you, brothers and sisters, are not in darkness, so that this day should surprise you like a thief." 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 4. This vigilance does not mean abandonment of worldly responsibility, but its fulfillment with eternal perspective, recognizing that our daily choices have transcendent significance. It is living simultaneously in two dimensions, fully engaged in the present while maintaining acute awareness of the imminent future. Wouldn't this tension between earthly commitment and heavenly hope be the most balanced spiritual posture for navigating uncertain times? This triumphant return is not just the end of one era, but the beginning of another. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, "Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven," Matthew chapter 6 verse 10, he was pointing to this coming reality, the convergence of the heavenly and the earthly. Far from being an escape from material reality, Christ's return represents its ultimate redemption. The promises of a new heaven and a new earth, where righteousness dwells, 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 13, do not describe a purely spiritual realm, but the renewal of the physical universe, a world where justice, peace, and harmony are not just aspirational ideals, but structural realities. The Cartesian division between spirit and matter, so fundamental to modern Western thought, will finally be overcome. What could be more revolutionary than the promise of redeemed corporeality and renewed earth? This is not cosmic escapism, but ecological hope in the deepest sense. The conviction that the planet and everything it contains will finally be liberated from the bondage of corruption to participate in the glorious freedom of the children of God. Romans chapter 8 verse 21. Imagine finding a detailed map of the future. Not just outlines or vague predictions, but a meticulous roadmap of the culminating events of human history. This is precisely the nature of Daniel's prophecies. They were not mere speculations or spiritual allegories, but precise revelations of the divine plan unfolding through the centuries. The crucial question we now face is not just whether these prophecies are true. History has already confirmed their astonishing accuracy, but how we should live in light of them. If we truly believe we are living in the final times predicted by Daniel, what difference should this make in our daily choices, priorities, and relationships? This is not an abstract academic question, but an existential imperative that demands practical response. Noah emerges as an essential prototype for our time. In an era characterized by widespread moral corruption, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. Genesis chapter 6 verses 8 to 9. Note the triad of qualities that distinguished him. He found divine favor, grace, maintained personal integrity, righteousness, and cultivated spiritual intimacy, walked with God. In normal times, these qualities would be admirable. In pre-apocalyptic times, they became literally life-saving. While the society around him proceeded in superficial normality, eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, Noah realized they were building lives on foundations condemned to imminent destruction. The essence of his wisdom was not in moral superiority, but in expanded temporal perspective. He saw beyond the immediate horizon of momentary gratification to the eternal consequences of present choices. Isn't this exactly the mindset needed to navigate our own turbulent era? Hebrews chapter 11 verse 7 reveals another crucial aspect of proper preparation. By faith Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the salvation of his household. Noah did not just receive privileged information. He responded with decisive action. Observe the sequence: divine revelation, reverent fear, diligent preparation. The fear here is not paralyzing panic, but solemn recognition of divine reality that motivates practical response. For decades, Noah methodically built the ark while preaching righteousness to his skeptical contemporaries, a massive investment of resources, energy, and social reputation in something that, in the world's eyes, seemed like religious delusion. This tension between conventional wisdom and counterintuitive obedience defines the journey of all who take prophecies seriously. What is the ark we should build today? Not a literal vessel, certainly, but a resilient character, a grounded faith, and a loyal community that can withstand the approaching storms. A critical distinction must be made between prophetic knowledge and prophetic wisdom. Prophetic knowledge deciphers symbols, calculates chronologies, and identifies fulfillments, intellectually stimulating activities, but potentially sterile. Prophetic wisdom, on the other hand, extracts practical principles of living from these visions of the future. Jesus severely criticized religious leaders who know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but cannot discern the signs of the times. Matthew chapter 16 verse 3. They possessed technical sophistication in theological meteorology, but failed to comprehend the transformative significance of the historical moment they were living in. Similarly, we can become experts in eschatology while remaining spiritually unprepared for the very events we study with such enthusiasm. True prophetic understanding always translates into personal transformation. Everyone who has this hope in him purifies himself, just as he is pure. 1 John chapter 3 verse 3. How is knowledge of Daniel's prophecies purifying your priorities, relationships, and character? Daniel's prophecies reveal not just future events, but the nature of God himself, sovereign over rising and falling empires, orchestrating history toward its predetermined climax. This perspective radically contrasts with two contemporary tendencies: secular thinking that sees history as a random process without transcendent purpose, and religious fatalism that abandons social engagement for apocalyptic escapism. Daniel modeled a third way: integral engagement in the political and cultural realities of his time, serving in positions of influence in pagan governments, while maintaining unwavering fidelity to eternal truths. He demonstrated that prophetic understanding does not lead to withdrawal from the world, but to more meaningful engagement with it, informed by divine perspective. Daniel served the empire without being seduced by its ideology. He influenced culture without being defined by its values. This skillful navigation between cultural relevance and countercultural faithfulness remains the most challenging balance for those who discern the signs of the times. Authentic preparation for final events demands fundamental reorientation of values. Jesus asked, "What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?" Mark chapter 8 verse 36. This penetrating question challenges the contemporary obsession with material accumulation, personal achievement, and maximization of hedonic experiences. If we are indeed living in the shadow of the final events described by Daniel, then investments in passing reputation, temporary comfort, and illusory security prove catastrophically short-sighted. The Apostle Peter, contemplating the final dissolution of the material order, inquired, "Since everything will be destroyed in this way, what kind of people ought you to be? You ought to live holy and godly lives." 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 11. The question is not whether we should plan for the future. We certainly should, but which future guides our planning? The prophetic perspective dramatically expands our temporal horizon, revealing that the only truly secure possessions are those that transcend time. Character formed in Christ's image, relationships grounded in genuine love, and treasures invested in eternity. One of the most consistent patterns in apocalyptic prophecies is the contrast between charismatic deceivers and faithful witnesses. Daniel chapter 11 verse 32 expresses this duality with crystal clarity. With flattery he, the Antichrist, will corrupt those who have violated the covenant, but the people who know their God will firmly resist him. Note the specific mechanism of seduction: flattery, manipulation through appeal to vanity and pride. The Antichrist system will not conquer primarily through open persecution, though this comes later, but through sophisticated flattery, the promise of greatness, significance, and belonging for those who conform. In contrast, Those who know their God will not merely resist passively, but will firmly resist and take action. This is not merely defensive resistance, but proactive, creating and living alternatives to the dominant system. In a world saturated with disinformation and media manipulation, discernment becomes a cardinal virtue. Jesus repeatedly warned about deceivers in the last days, culminating in the ultimate deception of the Antichrist. How are you cultivating spiritual discernment to recognize the difference between divine truth and convincing counterfeits? Daniel not only prophesied about the future, he demonstrated how to live faithfully in hostile times. Three elements of his spiritual practice stand out as particularly relevant for our era: unshakable prayer discipline, moral courage in the face of overwhelming cultural pressures, and unwavering hope in God's sovereign rule over human affairs. On prayer, Daniel chapter 6 verse 10 records, "When Daniel learned that the decree had been published, 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before." Even under threat of death, he maintained regular communion with God, not as religious ritual, but as existential anchor. His moral courage crystallized in the famous confrontation in the lion's den, but was forged much earlier through countless smaller decisions, beginning with his youthful refusal to defile himself with food sacrificed to idols. Finally, each disturbing vision that Daniel received was framed by the fundamental conviction: the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, Daniel chapter 2 verse 44. This transcendent certainty allowed him to face geopolitical turbulence with uncommon serenity. These three practices, disciplined prayer, progressive moral courage, and transcendent hope, remain essential for faithful navigation in our equally tumultuous times. Perhaps the most profound challenge revealed in Daniel's prophecies is the transformation of time. Daniel chapter 7 verse 25 reveals that the Antichrist will try to change the set times and the laws. This is not just manipulation of calendars, but fundamental re-engineering of human temporal experience. We already live in an era of constant acceleration, where the capacity for prolonged contemplation, deep thinking, and attentive presence rapidly deteriorates under the incessant bombardment of digital stimuli. The interval between desire and gratification continuously diminishes, creating pathological dependence on instant satisfaction. This collapse of the temporal horizon, growing inability to meaningfully connect with past or future, makes us extraordinarily vulnerable to manipulation. Spiritual resistance begins with deliberate practices of deceleration, restoring rhythms of rest, reflection, and renewal that allow expanded perspective. The Sabbath itself becomes a counterintuitive act of resistance, a tangible declaration that neither time nor productivity are our gods. How are you intentionally counteracting the frantic acceleration that characterizes our era? Daniel's final prophecies converge on an extraordinary promise of resurrection and reward. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. Daniel chapter 12 verses 2 to 3. Note the specific criterion for heavenly reward, not ecclesiastical status, theological erudition, or impressive religious achievements, but the humble work of guiding others in paths of righteousness. This passage suggests that our greatest preparation for the future is our present investment in other human beings, particularly in shaping their moral character and spiritual orientation. In an era obsessed with visibility, influence, and digital reach, Daniel reorients our ambition toward long-term impact immune to the superficial metrics of contemporary culture. Heavenly radiance will not be proportional to social media followers or material prosperity, but to the transformative depth of our influence in shaping the character of those God places in our path. The most revolutionary aspect of the prophetic message is how it completely reverses our conventional notions of power and victory. On the surface, it seems that Daniel predicts temporary defeat of God's people. The Antichrist will wage war against the holy people and defeat them, Revelation chapter 13 verse 7. But this apparent victory of the forces of darkness is precisely what triggers the final divine intervention. Christ's resurrection has already established the defining paradox of history. True victory may require apparent defeat. Authentic power often manifests through voluntary vulnerability. This completely inverts the dominant narrative of our culture that equates success with domination, wealth, and popular acclaim. Even in religious circles, we often measure impact through metrics borrowed from corporate and political logics. But the prophetic message suggests something radically counterintuitive. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. Matthew chapter 16 verse 25. The ultimate preparation for final events is not ensuring our survival at any cost, but cultivating willingness for sacrifice out of love for that which transcends our immediate comfort and security. Finally, Daniel's apocalyptic visions offer us, paradoxically, not despair, but grounded hope. They assure that, regardless of how chaotic or oppressive the world scenario may seem, history moves inexorably toward a divinely orchestrated climax. While human empires rise and disappear like waves on a beach, God's eternal purpose remains unchanged. This transcendent certainty profoundly affects how we navigate contemporary crises. We react neither with apocalyptic panic nor fatalistic resignation, but with resilient equanimity rooted in the conviction that the arc of the moral universe, though long, bends toward justice. We live as foreigners and exiles, 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 11, fully present in earthly concerns while maintaining constant awareness of our primary citizenship in an impregnable kingdom. As the writer to the Hebrews stated, we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, Hebrews chapter 12 verse 28. In times where seemingly solid structures prove dangerously fragile, this confidence in eternal realities becomes not just spiritual comfort, but existential foundation that sustains meaningful engagement with the urgent needs of our fragmented world. Daniel's prophecies are not merely abstract predictions of future events, but profound revelations about the nature of reality and our position in it. They tear the veil of history to reveal its underlying direction, the inexorable movement of the cosmos toward the definitive establishment of God's kingdom. This transcendent perspective radically transforms our understanding of the present. Events that appear chaotic and random are recontextualized as components of a coherent narrative with defined purpose and destiny. The apparent victories of evil are exposed as temporary, while the seemingly insignificant faithfulness of the righteous is revealed as eternally consequential. As we await the final unfolding of these millennial prophecies, we are called not to paralyzing fear or obsessive speculation, but to faithful vigilance and transformative engagement with our broken world. Our task is not to predict the exact moment of history's conclusion, but to live in a way that aligns with its ultimate destiny, building lives grounded in eternal values while the world around us invests in kingdoms doomed to dissolution. Those who discern the signs of the times become not just informed observers of history, but conscious participants in the cosmic drama unfolding for God's eternal glory. If you are interested in exploring more about spirituality, I have specially selected for you some videos full of profound knowledge and fascinating discoveries that you will love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step to transforming your reality.